Hi, my name is Tom Johnson. I'm a technical writer based in Seattle, and I have a blog, I'dRatherBeWriting.com. And on this blog, lately, I have been exploring different techniques for using AI tools with documentation. This is my prompt engineering series. You can find them at TW plus AI, prompt engineering for tech writing scenarios. I've got them here listed on the left. And previously, I've talked about the importance of gathering source input, whether it's from meeting notes or other internal documentation. I haven't really talked much about actually getting the AI to write. That's what we'll talk about in this one. All right, populating documentation templates using AI. Now, this is going to be less of a straightforward, this is how you do it kind of tutorial, because I think there are different approaches that work pretty well. But basically, here's the idea, right? You're going to first gather a huge body of accurate information. I already covered that in the previous tutorial, so I'm not going to trod back through that same territory. But now you've gathered all of this information. What exactly do you do with it? Well, if you've got a big, massive amount of information, you really need to guide the AI about what sort of documentation you want to write. And this is where templates come into play. All right, now I put that templates are optional because I do feel like for many topics, information has its own shape. And if you try to force it into a shape that it doesn't really fit, it's going to be an awkward outcome. But let's say that you have an overview, an API overview, which is arguably one of the hardest topics to write well. Chances are, if you've got a documentation portal, you've got many APIs, all with API overviews. And those overviews should more or less resemble each other, right? If one API overview looks totally different from the others, it creates less predictability and more like uncertainty for users. They don't really know what they're going to find. But if each of your API overviews follows a strict sort of outline, like, what is this API used for and how do you get started and so on, that helps users easily plug into that API if they're familiar with other parts of your documentation. Now, there are different ways that you can go about figuring out this template. You could go to the Good Docs project, for example, and you could look at their sample template for an overview. You could also look at other topics that you have in your documentation. This is probably the best way, right? If you've got a good overview that serves as a sample in another project for your docs, use that. That's what I did for a project. I had an SDK that I was documenting, had 7 different APIs, and each API in the SDK needed its own overview. And so we took an overview for a different API, and somebody had already kind of like made a template about the different sections that an overview should have and what should be covered in each of those sections. And so we took and modified that as a prompt for creating the overview for each of these 7 APIs, and it worked pretty well. All right, so okay, if you're gonna go the template route, this is one way you can do it. All right. So first of all, you're gonna pass in a bunch of source material. I've got a prompt here. You can check it out in the post, which if you're just listening to the audio version, see the link. But basically, say something like this. You're a technical writer creating API documentation for developers. As a technical writer, you write with both clarity and accuracy, following documentation style standards common in technical style guides. You've gathered a lot of source material in the form of engineering docs, project designs, and more. You've gathered information from meetings with the project team and have included transcripts of the meetings in the source material as well. You'll draw upon this source material to populate a documentation template. A documentation template just specifies a specific pattern for information, putting information into a specific order and arrangement. In this case, you'll create an API overview populating the API documentation template based on information in the source material. You'll proceed section by section through the template with me prompting you with the template sections and including an example each time. Stick as closely as possible to the source material for your information. If the information doesn't exist in the source material, don't invent information. Instead, write no information available in source material for that part of the template. Sound ready or sound good? Ready to begin? Here's the first section of the API overview template. Okay. And then paste in your template. A good template will have an example for each of the sections and so on. You could even pass in like maybe the whole template so that the AI can get a sense of like at a high level where it's going and so on. But that's the basic strategy. You say, hey, I've got source material. You're going to pull from that source material and populate a template. Now here's the template, right? You want to make sure that the AI draws only from the source material, that it doesn't just invent and hallucinate to populate things. It can take a while to develop the template, right? This is the hard part of it. This is why people who don't have a lot of patience might not have success with AI tools. If you don't take the time to develop a good template, then the AI tool might not know exactly what you want, and the outcome might not align with what you were hoping for. So a lot of this is really coming down to the prompts and how well you can prepare this. Now, keep in mind, you don't actually have to meticulously create all these templates yourself. You can basically just take an existing topic and ask AI to create the template for you. That can reduce a lot of the work. I think, I can't remember in this topic if I did that or not, but I've definitely done that. You can reverse engineer a template from an existing topic. Like let's say you have a different overview, right? You can pass that in and say, ask the AI to kind of figure out what prompt would have yielded that output and so on. That also works pretty well, surprisingly. But notice also that I've gone section by section here. This is a principle that I covered in a previous tutorial on meeting notes and so on. But rather than ask the AI tool to just generate the overview all at once, go section by section. The outcome is just much better. It's usually more accurate. You're able to course correct along the way. If you look at the first output and you say, you know what? I don't like this style. Maybe it's referring to the developer in third person or something, or maybe it's using the wrong casing for headings or something. I don't know. You can add in details that will help fix it so that when you proceed to the later sections, you don't have those same errors cropping in. A very common one is language. Maybe the AI tool will naturally adopt some marketing-esque language, saying things like, hey, you can leverage this for a really powerful output in your app that, I don't know, the words that aren't typically used in documentation. Documentation usually doesn't use many adjectives, and it just sticks to kind of the plain facts of things. So you can take and identify that language and say, hey, try to not use marketing type adjectives in the outputs, and that helps, right? So after AI responds, you can even add little signs of encouragement. Great, this is exactly what I want, or hey, you're close, but let's try again, and so on. Now move to the next section. Maybe this next section in your template is how to get started with the API, and you've got an example saying, hey, this is what this section should cover. Here's an example from another API. Now draw upon the source material and populate this second section. Right, again, this is a technique that works really well for overviews that follow a highly structured approach and have very predictable and consistent sections that you expect. All right, before we keep going here to section 3 and continuing on, let's pause briefly and I'm going to play an excerpt from a podcast that I did with Karen Brown from Zoom In Software on uncovering and communicating the value of TechCom work. It's about 2 minutes, and then we'll return here. Let's say that a company's goal is to increase its user base by, 10, 15% user adoption. How, as a technical writer, can you make the case that documentation is contributing towards this goal? I mean, there's always this disconnect between like docs and the actual goals that has been very difficult for tech writers to grasp or to make the connection between.
Let me give you a few examples, a couple of examples here. So first, we know from very clear data that today potential customers or even existing paying customers refer to technical content and to product content as the source of information before making a purchase, more than they go to other places like your company's marketing site or even peer-to-peer forums and things like that. And so we know that the decision to make a purchase or maybe to buy more of your product is heavily reliant on the kind of technical content you have and whether the user see that, what you have is what they need from a functionality and capability perspective. And this is throughout the user journey, right? If a user is just browsing around for a solution, if you have better content than your competitor, they're most likely to come back to you. If they're on the verge of just onboarding, right? So they will use technical content to onboard, and so on and so forth. And so what we are seeing is that documentation portals, which is the home for technical writers, are actually becoming the number one traffic for a company's users. And if you know how to measure that, and if you can actually see that linear growth in traffic, and you know that this traffic is part of it is people making a decision to buy your product, this is definitely something that you want to surface up to your leaders and definitely justifies an investment in making your content better, right?
All right, now I'm back, and thanks for listening to that. Continue on through your template. Section 3, let's say, is key capabilities and use cases, and so on. Follow the same pattern, showing an example, specifying very clearly what you want. Remember, this technique is sort of designed for a use case or a scenario where you've passed in 100, 200 pages of documentation and internal information that's just kind of all over the place. And now you're asking the AI to pull out different pieces of that information and arrange it in a specific order. If there's one thing that these tools really do well with, well, there's lots of them, but one sort of task that they do well with, it's classifying things and ordering things. So you're basically just taking that source material and putting it into a specific order in some ways. All right, section 4 in this sample prompt continues through it. Section 4 in this prompt has like technical details about the endpoints available or the methods available in the API and so on. All right, now let's say you've finished. You've got a sample draft and you're looking at it. Now you need to verify its accuracy. And this is where I probably will have another tutorial on this, but maybe I'll just kind of cover things here. But you want to error check the output, because remember that source material could have a lot of inaccurate things. And you need something against which can be a more legitimate source of truth. My recommendation is to perhaps even start a new session that doesn't have the source material as the context input, and to only pass in the reference material. And this assumes, again, that the API has reference material. If you're getting started really early on in the process where they don't have an API reference available yet, then it might not be possible. But generally, I get pulled in when the API is kind of nearing release, and I wait until it's maybe a month before release, depending upon its size and so on, because I want information to more or less be set. So the reference is usually available, even if it's a kind of an MVP, a minimum viable product output type reference. So you can pass in that reference and then use a prompt that asks the AI to check your overview against the reference to make sure that you didn't mention any methods or resources or capabilities that the AI can't verify through some part of the reference material. The reference material usually acts as a great source of truth that you can use to verify and fact check the output. Another technique you'll probably need to do is read the source material, right? If you're looking at the output and you're like, well, I didn't read any of the source material. I don't know why I can't say that word in this podcast. If you haven't read any of the source content, then how do you know if the output is accurate? Well, that's the big conundrum with using AI tools, right? It's like you've just saved yourself so much time by having the AI write the overview, but now you don't know if it's garbage, if it's highly accurate, if it's useful, or if it's just throwaway. So you could just basically send it to a PM and engineering lead and say, hey, will you review this? But that's kind of a lame way to proceed, right? You don't want to be at the mercy of anything they say, because sometimes reviewers, they don't even give you great feedback. So I recommend kind of reading through the source material and kind of glancing through it and skimming it and focusing in on those parts that are really helpful as a way to verify the overview. And this is not really so hard. Print it out if you want, or just set aside an hour and just kind of power through it. And because you already have in your head this overview, it'll be much easier to kind of make your way through the source material. You won't have to construct a mental model of what this API is for and what it does, because you've already kind of got that in your head, and you're just sort of looking to confirm it in the source material, which has its own sort of perception bias, right? Problems, but it's better than nothing. Then finally, you'll want to definitely review the content with subject matter experts, or SMEs. And if you have generated this content with AI, it's not a bad idea to flag that it was AI generated and to put a little request that they scrutinize it, even if it sounds right. Keep in mind that when people review content, they usually don't have such a thorough knowledge of the content that they can confirm every detail and documentation. They may be an engineer who can verify the technical details, but as far as the high level kind of use cases and what's this API for in terms of the business scenarios it addresses, that might be something that they aren't that sure about. But a PM might know that part, and a PM might be able to say, yeah, that kind of positioning is correct. But as far as the technical details, maybe the PM doesn't have a strong kind of grasp. So when you review these AI written documents, you have to kind of recognize what information people have, and when they put that rubber stamp of approved on your change list or whatever document you have, kind of probe a little bit and see and maybe ask them, are you familiar with all parts of the content that I passed, or just part of it? Like, what are you actually approving? Are you just saying that you don't have any objections to it? Or are you actually saying, yes, this is accurate? Because the approval could mean a lot of things. This is something I'm still trying to work through, right? And also there's an inherent bias whenever you tell people that content was AI assisted or generated. People are immediately suspicious and they read it in a different way than if they had read it or than if they had assumed that it were manually written. All right, so overall, this technique using documentation templates can work pretty well. As I said earlier, I don't find that I use templates too often. In fact, I'll be honest, the only time I've used a documentation template probably in the last like 5-ish years was in writing these overviews. And I knew that we wanted them to all look very similar. I mean, multiple APIs and one SDK. You have to have a consistent approach in your overviews. And also we wanted to fit in with the larger landscape of this documentation portal. But I think in general, information tends to have its own shape, its own themes. So rather than always trying to work from documentation templates, what I often do is say, and let's say I'm just adding a topic to an existing documentation, some how-to or some conceptual doc, I will ask the AI tool to generate a list of like themes or relevant like sections for a specific topic, kind of an outline, and then I'll look at that outline and kind of massage that outline and say, yes, let's keep this, or no, let's expand this other point more, and then use that kind of outline to serve as the template, and then let the AI populate it. I feel like that's almost more natural. Even with overviews, like one API to another, they're not all the same. They often have like pretty different roles or different sections that are needed. So they're not cookie cutter. And you don't want to force all information into this cookie cutter shape if it doesn't fit. You want to allow information to have the sections it needs based on the unique properties of that API or that topic. So don't get too fixated on the templates approach, but keep that in mind that it could be powerful, especially for API overviews. My name is Tom Johnson. My blog is I'dRatherBeWriting.com. I've got lots more prompt engineering resources here under TechWriter plus AI. If you go to prompt engineering for TechWriter scenarios, you'll see lots of different techniques that I'm always experimenting with and playing around with. Thanks again for listening.